From Donetsk, Ukraine, by BuzzFeed's foreign correspondent Mike Giglio. Mike, good to have you with us. The Ukrainian government has already managed to eject protesters from government buildings in other parts of eastern Ukraine, but demonstrators are still holding on there in government offices they captured Sunday in Donetsk. You've been in there. You've talked to these people in there. They've told you that Russia isn't paying them. But what's going on at this point? Are Ukrainian officials going to try to evict them?
Yeah, I think the Ukrainian officials here are playing it very safe. The governor gave a press conference today, and he walked back that Friday deadline. And he reiterated that they really don't want to escalate this situation. And with the amount of people who are in that building right now, the amount of people armed with clubs, there are reports, and I've heard officials here say that they may have some weapons. There's a sense that any kind of move by the police would really escalate things. And I think that the government here is going to try to avoid that at all costs.
Let's talk then about the military situation. I know you've been out reporting. You went out with Ukrainian forces on Wednesday, and the message from Kiev is that Ukraine will use its troops, that it will defend itself. But with all these Russian troops on the border, how big of a fear is it in that area that the Russians will invade?
It seems to be like that they're hoping it won't happen because they really don't have any means to defend themselves. And I've been at a number of bases near the border here in Donetsk, in Kharkiv, another place that might see a potential invasion. And, you know, they've rushed forces to the border, they've brought new recruits, but, you know, they've got very limited supplies of weapons. Their tanks are no match for the Russians, and their manpower and their training is also no match. So people say here that they're not expecting an invasion. They say they believe Russia is trying to influence the region and unsettle the region ahead of elections that are coming up in May, to delegitimize those elections and to exert control. And I think they're hoping that it ends at that, and that it won't become an invasion, which they won't be able to handle or stop.
What do they think that Russia wants? The New York Times said Wednesday that what the Russians really want is for Ukraine to have some sort of federal system of government that has strong regional governors that Russia can influence.
This is what the authorities right now are saying they believe Russia wants. However, if you speak to the protesters inside the building behind me in Donetsk, which I have done, they're very clear. They want Russia to send troops. They want a referendum on succession, and they want that to lead to joining Russia, just like happened in Crimea. And I even spoke to some young people who had been bussed in from Crimea on Monday, shortly after the building was taken. And they said that they're here to support the protesters, and they're here to make sure that what happened at home happens in Donetsk as well.
Right, and Ukrainians are concerned, on the other hand, that if that does, that Ukraine becomes this sort of federal system, that what the Russians are going to do is just simply try to pick off one province after another, as they did in Ukraine and in Crimea.
Right. I think pro-Ukrainians here see federalism as a Trojan horse for Russia to really exert just as much control as they might have if the region were to join Russia without any of the costs. So you have a weakened government, as they see it, you have a weakened central authority, you have a weakened country, and you have lots of room for Russian influence to sway the region as they see fit.
But as opposed to Crimea, there are more native Ukrainians in that part of Ukraine. And the question is, even if the Ukrainian forces aren't strong enough to really fight a Russian invasion, what does make that area more dangerous for the Russians is that there could be some sort of resistance, and that they wouldn't have an easy takeover as they did in Crimea, right. And that as Russian troops start dying, Putin, who is very popular for the Crimean takeover in Russia, would start having serious problems.
Right. You know, I've spoken to a number of Ukrainians here who are already planning guerrilla warfare and who are already gathering themselves for self-defense and who are collecting weapons, saying that if Russian troops do come, and we hope they won't, we're going to defend ourselves and we're going to start, they call it a partisan war, which means guerrilla war against the Russians, and they're very clear about that. And some of the more level-headed pro-Russia protest leaders that I've spoken to here in Donetsk and elsewhere in the region have made the same point. This is not Crimea. There are a few thousand, maybe, very aggressive pro-Russia protesters occupying the building behind me right now, but the wider population does not overwhelmingly support ascension to Russia, as was the case in Crimea. Even among ethnic Russians here, there's resistance to that idea. So I think you would see considerable resistance, and I think Russia knows that, and I think that's why you're seeing more confidence from authorities here than in Crimea that an invasion won't happen, that they can't see Russia making that decision, which would be very drastic, which would have serious repercussions on the international stage as well as locally. and why they're guessing that the unrest here is more for political ends and more to destabilize the presidential elections than it is as a precursor to a potential invasion.
And we'll have to see how this plays out, because even though the Ukrainians say that they will talk to the Russians haven't even recognized the new Ukrainian government. So Mike Giglio in Donetsk, appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks very much.